In the Alchemi-Culture philosophy, there are 7 polar aspects of humanity that we need to look at if we hope to transform ourselves and the world around us. These are cosmology and philosophy, law and justice, economics and currency, citizenship and social dynamics, agriculture and ecology, science and technology, and healing and medicine. In this podcast, we're going to talk about these topics. We're going to expose ideas that can help inspire an alchemical transformation of our culture, one listener at a time. Hi there, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Alchemi-Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Phoenix Aurelius, and today I'm joined by Padraic Walsh of The Legal Dad. Welcome to the show, Padraic. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Phoenix. How are you? Thank you for having me.
By all means, man. It's a pleasure to have you. This is a topic that I think is really important. With The Legal Dad, you are essentially helping a lot of dads out there with some legal services. And well, you're helping a lot of people. But go ahead and explain a little bit more about The Legal Dad and what it is that you do.
So today, Phoenix, I'm an attorney. I practice law, but I specialize in working with fathers who are having issues gaining access to their children, whether that be because of child support, child custody, parenting time, parenting plans, because of maybe a divorce. There's a bunch of different legal avenues that get involved, but the bottom line is we work with fathers only who are experiencing issues, legally within in the family court systems, accessing their kids, and helping them through what is a very traumatic experience in their lives, but helping them through in a compassionate yet legal way.
Well, I think that that's actually really important. I mean, this is something that even myself in my own journey have had a lot of problems with. And in fact, because I never felt that I was able to find an attorney that would represent me or my interests properly, I ended up avoiding the court situation with custody of my child altogether and ended up creating the best possible terms that I could with my ex. But I still feel like I have been cut out of a tremendous amount of time with my daughter. It was nowhere near like a 50-50 type of situation. And so I'm sure that there are a lot of other people out here listening who can relate to that. How did you get into this, though?
So my story, well, one, I empathize with you on your experience, Phoenix. And I, really appreciate that you're able to talk about it and tell your story, because I know that the more that we tell these stories, the more hope that we give other people, because how I got into this was a similar story to yours. My background is I immigrated from Ireland at the age of 17 to Chicago, where I did, the usual kind of Irish journey. Started working on construction sites and building sites, and then I, worked, decided to become a carpenter. Everybody was a carpenter, and but I was fortunate enough to, serve a carpenter's apprenticeship in Chicago for a number of years. Worked in the construction trade. Was fortunate to have, this trade allowed me to travel around the world, actually working. I've worked in, around Europe, around the United States, in various construction projects, but always kind of being drawn back to Chicago. And then that's where I met a lady who ended up becoming my wife. Then, we had a son together. But unfortunately, at like the end of 2007, 2008, our marriage broke down, um, ended up in divorce, but it was kind of like a perfect storm. The company I was working with was going through a financial difficulties. We had
Wow.
just bought a new house kind of right at the height of the property market. Um, but to kind of cut to the chase anyway, my ex filed for divorce. Again, I'm not assigning blame to anybody. I was as much to blame for the breakdown in our marriage as anybody else. But it was once it went into court, then the toxicity that began. Um, we finally got through our divorce after about 2 years. But then I get the text message, basically said, by the way, you'll never see your son again. So then it got into hiring attorneys. Then there was also this outside stuff going on. The company I'd worked for was in financial difficulties, and they were laying people off. And then I was trying to keep a case going, and I was trying to pay for attorneys and to get access to my child, and we'd go into the court, and it was just chaos.
Yeah.
And anyway, after 4 years of that, I ran out of money. I informed my attorney I don't have any more money, and my attorney basically flat out said, without hesitating, said, I'm sorry, there's nothing more I can do for you, and walked away. So I knew then that something had to change. So I had this epiphany basically on the sidewalk, my last day in court, failing to get anywhere to access my child. In fact, from the time the case began to the time I walked away because of finances, the whole situation became so much worse than it was earlier. But yeah, I just kind of had this epiphany that, something needs to be done. There has to be a better way. So at 34 years old, then I was resolute. I returned to school because leaving Ireland, all I had was high school education. Returned to school, completed my bachelor's degree, got accepted into law school, graduated law school at 40 years old. And today we have what's known as the legal dad, representing basically me. I'm the avatar of the business. I'm leaning on everything that I experienced through my experience through the whole system. And then that is helping me and my team to build a better law firm, a better law practice, a more compassionate law practice for fathers who are experienced what you and I have both experienced.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I just have to commend you on your entire path. Choosing to go back to school at 34 years old is not an easy decision, or something that once you get there, it can be really easy to squash squash all of your ambitions anyway, because it's like, oh wow, I'm just jumping through so many hoops just to get the degrees and the titles I need in order to do what I truly want to do. So to spend 6 years, like you said, actually becoming an attorney at 40 years old, wow, there's a lot of steps that had to be gone through there in order for you to do that. So extraordinarily commendable. But the other thing is, like, I can just imagine how intense the heartbreak is of never being able to see your own flesh and blood, and how much that would drive you. Is that still kind of your determining factor for why you're doing what you're doing, why you're so passionate?
So that is our mission, basically. In our mission statement is no client or no person should have to experience what I experienced. So we're very aware of what people are going through, the trauma they are experiencing, the depression that they can, fall into very quickly.
Mhm.
So we have, all these different stopgaps, and we have all these different kind of warning signs as we're moving through a case, where we come back and we check in with our client and we have conversations with our client, because leaning heavily on my experience and what I went through um, drives me to ensure to the best of my ability that none of my clients will experience what I did.
Yeah, that's absolutely so important and so critical. And, I remember when I separated with my ex cousin is an attorney who specifically works with children's rights and divorce and other things like this. Now, we weren't legally married, so we didn't have a divorce to deal with, and we had decided what to do with the different pieces of property and automobiles and other things. So that wasn't the hard thing. What was the hard thing was determining how often and when I get my daughter. One of the things that I remember early on was that my wife or my ex decided that she wanted to go back to school. And she wouldn't even let me have my daughter most of the time, instead choosing to put her into a daycare system when I had a full schedule, being able to do that because she was afraid that she would turn out like me, quote unquote. Um, I think that the amount of prejudice that gets pinned on dads in general is just ridiculous. And this happens not only from a public perception level, which is interesting to me, but it especially seems to happen in the courts, where the courts are like, a children needs their mother, but then the statement ends there. It's not a child or children need their parents, it's just the mother. Is that also kind of your experience from the court level of how courts historically tend to treat most most cases, unless there's really heinous abuse or something on behalf of the mother?
You're 100% correct, Phoenix. And unfortunately, so there's a few things I'd like to kind of touch on there. You mentioned
Please.
children's rights.
Yeah.
Is it not the child's right to have both their parents in their lives? But then, we go into court and you're 100% correct. It's like, well, the child should be with mom. And depending on, the age of the child. But you have this American folklore of, well, dad should be working. Dad should be the provider. So the only thing that ever happens in court with dad is, well, dad, let's show us your monthly gross income. Let's calculate how much you owe on child support and get back to work.
Wow.
And that's kind of like in a very simplistic way. Thankfully, things are changing. There's people like you, there's people like me. We're raising our voices. There are other nonprofits setting up around the country, helping fathers to have their voices heard. And then also, and I know of one nonprofit in the Florida area, and basically their name is Our Children Have Rights.
Nice.
And it's very interesting when you take the mom and dad out of it and you're left with a child. Well, does the child not deserve to have their rights heard? To have both their parents? They're from both their parents.
Exactly. Yeah.
So touching off another point you mentioned about, well, mom did not want your daughter to spend time with you for fear your daughter would turn out like you. Well, I think your daughter will turn out like you at least 50% of the way because she's
Yeah, that's her background anyway.
that's her background and her DNA anyway. And but thankfully, in some states and some jurisdictions, that fact pattern that you gave, that, well, mom decided on outside daycare, even though dad was available to provide the care for your own child. And not to, belittle the point to say that dad is only a babysitter. But there are some statutes in some states, not all, but basically say that daycare will be a second choice if one of the parents are available to care for the child. But then there's the argument where mom is saying, oh, well, it's a financial benefit, or, it's a hardship on me to have to, go to dad's house and dad's new place. But for all the cases that we've done and been involved with, and my own case, and hearing your story, right away, it's vengeance from mom against dad, and the only weapon they've left to use, because you mentioned in your fact pattern, well, we divided the property and we divided this, and
Yeah.
the only thing we couldn't work out was, parenting time with the child.
Yeah.
The only weapon mom has left is the child.
The child, exactly.
And they seem to leverage that because of what has on in the courts over the years, what has, you know, the way people have been brought up. Like you look at the generation before us, I figure, you and I are probably close to about the same age.
Yeah.
Um, our parents, it was, well, mom was the homemaker, dad was the get out and work. Now we're in 2024, things are totally different. The
Yeah.
generation coming behind us are different, but our generation is the one kind of stuck in the middle where,
It's
we want
true.
to move on, but yet there are peers that want to stay behind. That's kind of so I don't know if I'm rambling a little bit there, but
No,
I
no,
I do get pretty passionate about this.
Fatty 15 is a science-backed supplement with a fascinating backstory. By observing and comparing healthy versus unhealthy populations of dolphins, the pure omega fatty acid 15, known scientifically as C15-0, was the largest differentiating factor between the two groups. Once they found that it was so critical for dolphins' health, it was then studied in human populations with a similar result. It's a naturally occurring fatty acid in certain small fish as well as in raw dairy, though it would take heaps and heaps of these foods to even comprise a small percentage of what you'd get in a single capsule. C15-0 has 3 times more benefits to the human body than omega-3 fatty acids, with over 36 cellular benefits. It repairs 83% of all cells in the human body. It reverses aging at the cellular level, reduces oxidative damage, strengthens the cells against lipid peroxidation, repairs mitochondrial functions, and so much more. See, our cells are regularly damaged by electromagnetic, neuroemotional, and physical stressors, so we could all use a supplement to help strengthen our cells and ensure proper cell membrane health as well as cell detoxification. Now, I'm not always a fan of isolated supplements, but there's always an exception to the rule, and this is definitely one of them. I've been taking Fatty 15 for nearly a year now, and the IDF readings of my cells have skyrocketed during that time. While I have a number of supplements that I suggest for cell health, Fatty 15 is the backbone of the protocols that I use for myself and my clients. Now, you can support this channel while also getting 20% off your first order when you use the link in the description below. Your cells thank you in advance. All right, let's get back to this episode.
Well, and I think, and good on you too, because that makes for an attorney who's actually going to put everything into the situation that they can in order to get the most change out of it. And like I said, in my own journey with my wife's cousin being an attorney, he used to say directly to me and also to her, sue him for everything. You can sue the pants off of him. You can take him and you can make sure that your daughter never sees him again. Which this was insane because there was no abuse in this situation. I woke up to a text message one morning, said, "Hey, I think we're going to separate." And this was meant to be sent to my ex's brother. Instead, it was sent to me. So I woke up with a text message like this. Later that evening, we had a discussion. She decided she wanted to separate. My daughter was really young at this point. I had a brand new business owning a metaphysical store. I wasn't around a lot. And so she was going through a lot of postpartum depression and being alone with the responsibility of this child pretty much the whole time, while the entire financial burden to provide for the family was on me. And because this was a new business, it wasn't like there was a ton of money coming in. But that was the entire nature of our separation. What drove our separation was that I was not around enough and she needed more support and needed more help. And just by nature of the situation, I wasn't able to provide that. But it turned into a bitterness that got held against me massively. And like you said, even though there were a lot of niceties that were exchanged and pleasantries, so to speak, in order to give the illusion that this was not the case, what was abundantly apparent from my perspective and from the perspective of everybody who knew me was that this situation was being weaponized against me and still is as a way of getting back against me for not being there during a tough time that she needed. And, the amount of pressure in that situation, I don't know that there would have been a resolution. I think that more often than not, though, the reason that I say that, and not to kind of hash up all my own shit, but rather to say, there was not a case of abuse. There was not a case of neglect. There was not a case of any of these things. And still, a perceived weaponization of my child has occurred against me. Um, and I think that a lot of individuals, a lot of dads out there have that very same thing projected against them by mothers. And for whatever reason, the general persuasion that we have sociologically, we don't say, oh, well, maybe these conversations are more common now, but at this time, 10, 15 years ago, this was not really a big conversation of, well, no matter what, dads are still there and they're still able to provide and they're still able. It was, oh, he must be a deadbeat. Oh, he must, there's like the deadbeat dad type of thing. And admittedly, there are a lot of dads that just walk out on a situation and just like, hey, I leave. But that, I don't think that that's the majority of them. I really don't. Um, so it's interesting. I'd be interested to hear your own perspective on this too, and the type of kind of prejudice that might exist within just general sociology, just like within everyday American culture.
So I'm glad you brought up one that 10 or 15 years ago, because it's about 15 years ago when my journey began. And when I went through it, the internet was only a baby.
Yes, same.
There was no groups. There was, so anyway, long story short, I thought I was the only one in the world going through what I was going through. And nobody knew or, could even comprehend what I was feeling or going through, because as far as I knew, nobody else was going through it.
Right. Yeah.
But now fast forward to the position that I'm in today, it feels like every second family is going through it. And it's, yes, I was called a deadbeat dad, even though the only resolution in my entire case of 4 years, the only resolution that they came to was the amount in child support that I would pay.
Mm-hmm.
There was no other resolution. Now I'd like to, the whole sociology of it, believe it or not, attorneys really make any situation like this, an attorney can make it 10 times worse. So you mentioned the phone call you got from your ex's cousin.
Yeah.
Take him for everything he has. Sue the pants off him. Never see the
Just
child
using
again.
fear tactics against me, just fear tactics was all that it was. It's like, you have to do everything that we say in court. Otherwise, this, and this will happen to you. And I can make your life hell. And I was just stunned. This was somebody that just a few years earlier, I'd had all sorts of conversations with at a family dinner table. All of a sudden now saying that I'm going to be taken for everything that I have,
Yeah. So that I believe, totally prolonged. So, well, there's two things at play here. I think attorneys are one and judges are the other. Where an attorney comes in, they know they really don't have a case against dad, but they just create chaos in the courtroom. And there's so much chaos that the judge is just kind of like, there's nothing I can do because you're not presenting your issues to me. So please go away, try and figure it out and come back in 90 days. But now that's 90 more days for dad to be without seeing his child. That's 90 more days for dad to be paying their attorney if they have an attorney.
Yeah.
Billable hours. 90 more days of living in hell, not knowing what's going on, not knowing whether it's up or down. 90 more days of just playing it around in your mind is like, well, what did I do to deserve this?
Yeah.
And then you go back after 90 days and then the chaos starts again. You go in hopeful and you come out. But I suppose maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself a little. The weaponization of the court system and CPS, Child Protective Services, vengeful people have this down. And they'll call CPS. Oh, there's the child got stung by a bee. And the next thing, all of a sudden, it's child abuse. And they call CPS, and the next thing, dad is removed out of the child's life until CPS can do this full investigation. Takes maybe a couple of weeks. Then dad is like, then it comes down to, oh, well, the child just had a bee sting and had the dad didn't do anything. But now you have dad stigmatized by a CPS call, even though there was no findings. Or, then dad has not seen his child for the couple of weeks while the CPS investigation was going on. Or the other one is these orders for protection or protective orders. And, moms run into the court and say, Judge, I'm in fear of my life.
Yeah, whether it's true or not, that card can be played.
And because it's ex parte, it's only one side that shows up. And this person shows up in front of the judge and says, Judge, I'm in fear of my life. The judge is like, yeah, can we find this guy at work? Maybe bring him in, and but the judges can't. So the judge is out of an abundance of caution. They give these OFPs out like, giving out candy at Halloween. Here you go. But then a hearing has to, happen, within it, you have a constitutional right, and so, within 14 days or so, a hearing, the person then has to. But the damage has already been done. Now somebody is stigmatized. They have an order for protection against them.
Yeah.
They can't talk to their children. They can't talk to, and then you go in and then the judge says, well, save us all time. You can accept this without findings, and we'll just put it in place for a year. And, and people without representation, they say, okay, well, nothing will go on my record. But then this order for protection is there, even though there's no findings, whether guilty or not guilty. But it really comes into play if somebody was working or traveling through Canada.
Wow.
The OFP still shows up, even though there was no findings.
Really? So this actually follows a person criminally.
Oh yeah. It's that's the court system being weaponized by mostly mothers. Now, yeah, we can't blame the judge. The judge, reads this document and it's harrowing detail, usually compiled by an attorney.
Right. Almost always, yes.
The judge is kind of like, well, I don't want to be responsible for somebody getting, harmed or maimed or killed. So I'm going to give them this without, not so much, the judge understands the consequences, but then this, genteel man comes in and is like, Judge, I don't know what this is all about. And then the judge says, the judge may lift it and say, look, there's no need for but it's still too late for somebody who travels to Canada and stuff like that. The damage is still done.
Wow, because the judge would not choose to, or maybe is left powerless at this point, I don't know, to scrub it from the record. How does that work?
Well, it takes time. It can be done, but it takes some time. It's in these records and it's there and it's court filings and but the damage that people do to others just for their own gain is just horrifying. And you will not see that more prevalent than in family court. It's absolutely horrifying what another human being will do to another human being, let alone the parent of their child, that they're willing to go to those lengths, false CPS reports, false orders of protection, just to see if they can get a leg up in their custody case, just to see if they can get a leg up in getting more child support. And yeah, it's all but they're not thinking about the child at all.
No. Well, realistically, I think that a lot of the mothers that I have seen that have ended up doing this had to have legal representation who advised them to go through these things, because then it would, quote unquote, be a shoe-in. Is that also kind of your experience, as as a lawyer who is serving a lot of fathers? Do you find that the attorneys that are working for, in this case, the plaintiff or whatever, are actually utilizing warlike mechanisms in court in order to push the case forward so that they can win for their client?
I don't necessarily think they even want to push the case forward to a win. There's a lot of attorneys that want to prolong the case. They say, oh, you forgot to argue this. Let's argue this. Oh, this is your right. Let's argue it. More billable hours.
Wow.
Oh, you don't have any more money? Sorry, there's nothing more I can do for you.
Really? So it's basically retaining the client for as long as possible, as long as that client can pay the retainer and pay the legal fees and then just draw the case out as long as they can until the funding stops. And then we're done here.
Yeah.
Wow. What an corrupt system that way, eh?
So there is there's a saying that goes around every now and again. 99% of attorneys make the rest of us look bad. And unfortunately, and I come at this being a non-traditional attorney, being somebody who got caught in the hamster wheel of money. Just pay. You got to pay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a good father. I myself and mom may not get along that well anymore, but
Yeah.
I'm no danger to my child. I'm no danger to my son. Oh, you are. More money, more money, more money. You got to pay more money. Oh, well, let's get a guardian ad litem involved. Here you go. You can choose 3 of my friends. Oh, that's another $450 an hour.
Wow.
Let's get on that hamster wheel. Oh, now you need a therapist. Here, you can choose between 3 of my friends. And it's all, this hamster wheel. But,
Wow.
my vision for my future, Phoenix, is I would love to develop a speaking tour with people like you, people like me who have been through this experience, to go and speak to attorneys to say, hey, there comes a point where you need to tell your client to stop, where you need to tell your client to start thinking more about their child than thinking about revenge against the other party. What has happened in the past has happened. It's over and done with. It's time to move on for the best interests of your child. Unfortunately, attorneys are like, oh, you want revenge? You've come to the right place. Let's go. Because kind of, bring us back to our child support conversation, show us your monthly gross income. Well, mom also has to show her monthly gross income. The first stop that comes to is her attorney. Her attorney is like, oh, she's making 20 grand a month. This is a good account. And let's keep going.
Yeah.
And then let's get into court and let's create chaos, because then the judge can't do anything. So then we have to come back again. My client is happy because the child is not seeing dad. I'm happy because now we get another day out of court, and then I have to prep for court again. Oh, I got to go do depositions. Let's do depositions. Let's $450 an hour. Thank you very much.
Oh my God.
Where anybody who will come to our office, it's like we skip through all the BS. We have real serious deep down conversations with our clients. And, they say, oh, but she's done this. Yeah, she has. Shit, it's done.
Yeah. That's great. So instead of writing this down as a point of weaponization to be used in the court case, it's like, yeah, okay, but let's not focus on that. She did do that. Let's move to the next thing.
Yeah. We want to get you into your child's life. That's our mission. That's our goal. But we need to do that as effectively as we possibly can without wasting time. So we're very strong in a court setting where the chaos begins, because that was where my weakness was back in my own experience and my attorney's weakness. We let the chaos be created, and we had no way to counteract it. But now when we come across attorneys, and I won't say all attorneys, I don't want to tar every attorney with this brush, but it happens on a more than you would want basis. But when we go into a courtroom, and if an attorney tries to create chaos, the first thing we do is cut them off and say, Judge, we're not here to talk about that. This is what we're here to talk about. Let's focus. And we find great results in that, because the judge kind of, unfortunately, can wander with
whatever's presented.
Yeah, but if we can bring back and say, Judge, that's not for today.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. Okay, counsel, let's focus on this. So to try and dilute the chaos the best we can, and get down to speaking facts and talking facts and talking truth. The sooner we can get a person out. But it also depends on our client.
Totally.
How much hatred have they built up over the months and the experience and the weeks and the false accusations and the false reports. So then we need to ground our own client to say,
stop trying to poke your partner, your ex, in the eye, and let's focus on your kids here.
So that's basically it. So we give them three options. We say, you can just give us all your money now and be on your way, if this is your attitude. Or if you want to continue with this attitude, you can just slowly give us all your money and then be on your way. Or your third option is, you listen to us, you ground yourself. What has happened in the past has happened. If you want to have a vengefulness against your ex, go right ahead and do it, but do it on your time. Don't do it on ours. Brilliant. Because our time is precious, your money is precious, and we want you to have more time with your child and money in your pocket to go to the movies, go to baseball, do whatever. But if you follow this vengeful streak, the only place it'll end is, I will have all your money and you'll have zero time with your child.
Yeah, exactly. That's the recourse here. So, man, great system of ethics, though, and not falling into the same trap that a lot of, the adversarial force would have in saying, oh, yeah, so many times, it doesn't matter exactly what the case is, whether you see, the ads where it's like, did you get in a car wreck recently? They're always trying to make attorneys, like you said, 99% of them are making a case against who is victimized and spinning every detail possible to say, well, look how this could be interpreted. And then it becomes a battle of minds, realistically, in the courtroom, instead of a battle of facts. It becomes a battle of perception and a battle of opinions, and who can share the most victimized opinion in order to gain the favor of the judge or the jury. So it's really, really fascinating to see that you, as an attorney taking on these cases, have a system of ethics. And it's not like, hey, I'll represent you in the same way that your ex is going to have representation, but rather, this is about the children. And if you continue to allow your hatred for your ex to consume you, you're going to end up childless and moneyless. So consider that one and just throwing it back into their court. I think that's fantastic. It's important. And it helps. I would imagine that legitimately helps to focus on what is important. And it also probably gives you, as an attorney, an eagle-eye view of which one of your clients are out for revenge versus which ones are out for their children.
It does. And we have a pretty good system here, where we qualify clients. If we have a hint of revenge, and we can tell through our interactions and through our consultations and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah.
You know what I mean? What they're saying, we know where this is going. We will have a real deep down heart-to-heart conversation with this potential client and basically say, this is not the firm for you if you want A, B, or C.
Yeah.
This is the firm for you if your outcome is this. And kind of depending on their answers to that. Now, we have also been, halfway through a case where, this slipped by and we're representing and, the whole thing comes into play. But then we get the requests and we're like, no. And then they're like, but you're my attorney. You're supposed to do what I ask. And
That's
I
not
have
the way
the
it
money.
works.
I have the money. I'll pay you. I'm like, I don't want your money.
Yeah.
I want you in your child's life. Back to, hey, if you want revenge against your ex, you do that in your own time.
Yeah, exactly.
But, some clients have become so insistent that they've either fired us or we have fired them because we're not playing the revenge game.
Yeah.
And if they want to play the revenge game and fire us, that's fine. We'll return whatever money we owe you and we'll move on to the next client who really wants help. Or it gets so bad that they're just saying, hey, I'll pay you, I'll pay you, I'll pay you. And we still want you to be our attorney. We're like, well, we don't want to be your attorney because our goals are not aligning here.
Exactly. Yeah, they're diabolical odds.
Yeah. You want me to go against my mission, and that is not to be seeking revenge. Yes, yeah, shit happens, absolutely. But
Yes, it does.
if we can make everybody in the present and say, hey, moving forward, this is what we would like. But yeah, it's a crazy world.
Yeah, it is. So in the cases that you see and with the clients that you work with, do you as an attorney ever suggest to some of your fathers like, hey, I see something that's kind of out of line here. Maybe you would do best with a little bit of therapy to address this anger issue or to address this thing? Because like, for instance, I know in a lot of cases that I've seen, dad has maybe had a drinking issue or had something else. This created a lot of the contention between the parents, oftentimes to begin with. Then one parent says, hey, you had a drinking issue or you have a drug addiction or you have, whatever the case is. I don't feel comfortable with my kid around you. And in a lot of instances, a lot of dads just already give up the ghost before ever speaking with their attorneys because they know, well, I would have to take care of this. This is going to be a losing battle right up front. So is there any sort of solution for a lot of fathers that find themselves in that particular situation?
So there are. So let's just take alcohol. You know what I mean? Again, alcoholism is thrown about pretty loosely. What's your definition of an alcoholic?
Yes.
It's like, oh, 6 beers a week, you're an alcoholic. Um,
Yeah.
so we're able to write into different agreements. And again, this is, dad would have to be on board, but there are now these mobile home breathalyzer kits that there's an app on your phone. You can send the report to the mom. It's actually video recorded that you video yourself blowing into this app and then it'll give a live reading. So we write into, I won't say all the time, but we write into an agreement, say, okay, well, neither parent will partake in alcohol or be inebriated or anything like that during their parenting time.
Brilliant.
And here's how we'll do it. We'll, at the beginning of their parenting time, they will blow into this. They'll do it halfway through and they'll do it at the very end. Now, we did have a situation one time where dad, this was all in the agreement. Dad was living by it. It was only going to last for 6 months. And then, if everything was okay after 6 months, then dad could just drop the breathalyzers and continue with his parenting time. But about 3 months in, dad was at the wedding. Mom happened to be at the same wedding. Dad
Oh,
had a glass of champagne at the wedding. The next day, mom is filing, saying, he's drinking,
Oh
I'm able
no.
to pull the kids, he's never going to see his kids again. I saw him drinking. Here's a photo of him drinking at this wedding, and created chaos for like 2 months until we got into court. So dad now misses 2 months of parenting time. We get into court, and then we're like, Judge, he was not the on parent.
Yeah.
His kids were nowhere near it. His ex-wife, the mother of the children, left the kids with their grandparents. So where is one, him having a glass of champagne when he's 20 miles away,
Yeah.
harming the children? And two, is it never said that he could never drink.
Yeah. Just during parenting time, during active parenting
Just
time.
during his parenting. But then that goes back to the attorney who wrote that up and filed the thing for mom. Instead of mom, the attorney being the adult in the room and say, no, I'm not filing this. I'm not
Yeah,
writing
this
this.
is nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, they went and did it because, another bunch of billable hours. Then I'll tell you a very extreme case. Veteran, retired on a medical condition out of one of the armed forces, had seen lots of combat, PTSD, thought he was going to be in the military all his life. Ended up having a medical condition diagnosed in his early 40s. So he had to be medically discharged.
Oh no.
This man, a whole new world, being at home all the time with his wife, was, trying to adapt then to civilian life, get a regular job.
That alone is such a huge thing. When we're talking about vets, especially active duty battle ready vets,
Mhm.
trying to even assimilate into civilian life, oftentimes their kids are their only saving grace and why they're able to keep it together. When you pull that rug out from under them, what is it to hold that individual together? So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I've seen that case more times than what
Yeah.
I would like to, and I think it demands a little extra special comment.
So with this man, it was just, he was suffering PTSD from his experiences, from his previous employer, had sent him on different missions and stuff like that. And then to try and adapt to civilian life anyway. Home life wasn't great, arguments abound, wasn't sleeping, would go to the VA, more antidepressants, more pills, more
Yeah.
this, more therapy. Then he'd have days of just rage. But anyway, one day, things got out of hand. Um, he's arrested. There is an order for protection then put in place, um, warranted even by his own words. But he calls us and he says, you know, I have this order for protection against me. I'm not going to lie. I'm a military man, and my word is my integrity. My word is my bond. This happened. Everything she said happened. Um, but my kids, and now there's going to be a divorce, and it's just going to get so ugly, and they're going to bring up my past, and oh, you know it's the end of the world. And I'm basically like, okay, sir, um, you've called the right place, but you've called me a little too early. First, we need to deal with the root cause of what your troubles are. You've already admitted that you have issues. And I totally, I don't understand your issues because I haven't had the experiences that you've had.
Sure. Yeah.
But I know going into court now and fighting through an order for protection, fighting through, a divorce, this is only going to get so ugly, and it's going to do more damage than it is good. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to call my friend who's based out in California. Here's his website. I want you to set up an appointment. You talk to them and then come back and talk to me. So this friend of mine is a PhD psychologist who specifically works and treats PTSD. He came back and said, this looks like a great program. I'd love to do it, but I just can't afford it. And I'm like, okay, well, we have another friend who knows all the nonprofits who will pay for this treatment for you because you're a veteran. So basically what happened was our friend went and worked with our psychologist out in California. It was a 4-week intensive course online, conversations, journaling, all that kind of stuff. But then he was flown out to a place out in California where they did a psychedelic treatment.
Sure.
It was, a hero's dose, guided dose of psilocybin. Then he had a few days, but he was with other veterans. They all kind of did it together, and they did their circles and their
Sure, yeah.
conversations and
Which
stuff
is
like that.
probably profoundly healing. Profoundly.
Profoundly. I had recommended to this man to then take a 2-week vacation after the event, maybe spend another 2 weeks out in California or wherever, or rent a car, just to
Let it
give
all
him some
sink in.
time to let it all sink in.
Yeah.
He came back to me after a couple of weeks and he's like, hey, that was the most, life-altering, life-changing experience ever. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Myself and my wife were still getting divorced, but we basically already have it done. We're wondering, will you write it up for us? And I'm like, of course. So they had agreed everything. Anyway, fast forward today, he has a great relationship with his ex-wife. She is a new partner. He is a new partner. They go hang out together. The kids are over and back to each other's houses. They live like 2 blocks apart.
Wow.
The kids are having the best of every world. But that was we as attorneys, well, maybe me being a very untraditional kind of attorney,
Sure.
we went after the root cause of what was causing this man's turmoil, which in turn then was causing turmoil and toxicity within his marriage, within his relationship with his wife, with his kids. And thankfully we were able to, I don't want to say cure it, but this man is living his best life right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that that's important. And from my perspective, most of the attorneys that I know, they're very, very well connected. They know a lot of people either from courtroom and other court cases, or just oftentimes through friendships where they happen to meet other people in different things and they can refer out a lot. And in fact, most traditional attorneys do this anyway, but they do it more towards whatever type of victimhood or other types of assessments that they need instead of helping both partners oftentimes get the help that they need. When help is suggested, it's usually a weaponized type of thing, like this person is ill and therefore they need help. Go send them, make it one of the contingencies for custody, for instance, that you have to go and do this thing. That's typically what I've seen in the past. So it's really, really refreshing for me to hear like, hey, look, you come to me as a client and and you tell me your story and we can tell if something's awry. I want to tell you, you should handle that root cause of the problem because, like in this case, when your man says, oh yeah, sure, it was my fault, when I get arrested, sure, that's my fault. You have to do something about that in order to say, well, how can you assure that this won't happen to your children as well? In our heads, we always want to say, no, it would never happen because I wouldn't cross that line. But you think you would say that about your wife too. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And still these things happen. So I think it's highly ethical and really important. And it's just really heartening for me. I love hearing that you were like, hey, go do this, especially doing a psychedelic assisted therapy for somebody with a complex case of PTSD, like a battle groom soldier.
Mhm.
That just going from active duty and being in any battleground, whether you saw or had to do hellacious things or not, and then coming back to civilian life, that alone creates the conditions of lack of meaning in your life, that creates lack of purpose, lack of drive. You know, you go your whole life fulfilling orders in active duty military work, to all of a sudden you have to figure it out. You're just a civilian again. It's the dichotomy there is crazy. But then when you add complex battle situations and scenarios where you had to fulfill orders, and those orders maybe would not be what you would do, the ethics that you wrestle with your entire life can be really intense until or unless you have the opportunity to fulfill a journey like, you know, that psychedelic assisted therapy session. So man, that, I think that speaks volumes, and it speaks volumes to your character too, Padraic, because I don't know many attorneys that would ever even consider that. It would be like, how can I utilize these details to win? Or I don't think you have a winning case. We should create some sort of shitty resolution agreement. So yeah, that's fantastic to hear that.
But even is it so I have a another friend of mine who's a mediator, and you know some cases are just better off being mediated, and this
Absolutely.
man is you know, he's an untraditional mediator also, but I would listen to a story from a potential client and they're like, listen, you know, I'll pay you the money and I want this letter wrote, and I'm like, you do know once I write that letter and deliver that letter that your relationship with your ex-spouse, with the mother of your children, is forever done. It's changed forever. You guys have co-parented for X amount of years. You know, right now you're just at an impasse, but I don't believe the courtroom is the direction or attorney's letters, because I understand the power in my letter, the power to damage
That's right.
just with my letterhead. So I I will refer to my friend and I'll call him up and I'll give him the lowdown and I'll say, hey, you know, I want you to call this guy. He's expecting your call. And always before he hangs up, he's like, Porrick, I can't believe you didn't take the retainer. He's like, I've been at this for years, he said, but I still can't get over you didn't take the retainer.
It's like, hey, it wasn't the best option in this case.
So I think it also comes back to, you know what I mean, what is people's character, you know what I mean? Unfortunately, in the United States, the only way we can measure things and you know, how do you measure success? You know, but people say, well, by the amount of money you have.
Right.
But
Right.
it's, I think that's totally wrong. And you know, why would I take money knowing that what I do from here on out to this family is going to have lifelong and generational long effects on this family? By, you know, if I took this guy's money and I sent that letter, that's his relationship with his co-parent, whom they have co-parented together for a lot of years, double figures.
Yeah.
It ruins it forever. But now you have these teenage children who are now caught in the middle because of my letter, who are now going to be forced to choose. Do you want mom or
Yeah.
do you want dad? And then that then has a generational impact on them teenage children, because their relationship with one parent or the other is forever changed.
Absolutely.
So the dominoes that my original letter to somebody, it just sets off this chain reaction that can last for generations.
And
Where
not to
I'm,
mention impacting your own society. Who wants to be living in a society where so many people are actually suffering,
Mhm.
you know, emotionally? We lose a little bit of our humanity each time we do something just for money without considering the entire sociological context of what it is that we're doing. What goes around comes around, is always the way that was expressed to me as a kid, as a child. And I think that it's really important that we think about that with our actions, whether we're talking about, a situation with law, or whether we're talking about, even a heating air conditioning specialist, for instance, coming into the house and selling you something that you don't need, or whatever else. The ethics behind all of this create a society of people who are living with regret and with emotional pain, with chaos and whatever else. That makes it so much harder as individuals to connect with each other when there are all of these filters of pain and doubt and hurt and skepticism. We lose our humanity a little bit more, I think, each time that we engage in those types of behaviors. They have broader sociological ramifications, I think. So.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so, we talk about generational trauma. You have a child, um, the courts don't like to use the word alienation. But, let's just say, in my case, for instance, I haven't seen my child in over 10 years. But the likelihood of my son being separated or alienated from his children is a lot higher,
Yes,
than a child who has grown up in a two-parent household, whether it be a co-parent household or not. But the data now is really coming out there, where they follow children who were children when they were essentially separated from one parent, and follow them through now their trials and tribulations. And the data now is suggesting that they have a very high likelihood of actually being separated or alienated from their own children.
yeah. Well, and it makes sense. I mean, what is passed on and not healed within us ends up kind of being perpetuated as a way of constantly getting in our face, of saying, hey, look at this, look at this, look at this. And a lot of us will say, no, I don't want to look at that, turning to alcohol, to drugs, to substances, to sex, to whatever distractions, shopping, whatever, in order to avoid looking at that. So yeah, that's really insane. Now, Padraic, I want to ask you, how how did all of this affect you, especially being an Irish man and an Irish immigrant here to America? Because, my understanding of the Irish culture is obviously like, yeah, well, we live in very unhappy lifestyles if we have to with our marriage, but we stay together oftentimes for the kids. And there's kind of a thing like, when you're married, with very few exceptions, when we're married, we're married. We took that vow before God and our family. We don't break that. To coming here, where people oftentimes have 3, 4, 5 divorces sometimes under their belts. How did this kind of influence your own path and your own history, and change your own take on things as you're an attorney here? Was that even a determining factor, or something that you are conscious of as an influence or anything?
So I do think, my Irish heritage and my Irish upbringing has a big part to play in the way I operate my business, in the way that I treat people. Irish people are always very helpful,
Yeah.
um, and very empathetic and very trusting, um, sometimes to a fault,
Fair enough.
where the United States, for the most part, it seems there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser.
Mhm.
So I take my, my Irishness, and my upbringing and my culture into the courtroom to kind of say, Judge, we're not looking for a winner here. Well, we are looking for a winner, and that being the child.
Right, right.
And the child should be the only winner in this whole thing. Whether mom and dad like what happens, and I don't care whether my client likes what happens or not. The sign of a good deal is that neither party are happy. But if we can
Yeah.
confidently say that the child has won here, the child still has both their parents in their lives, no matter how imperfect it is, it's still better than just having one parent. Now, when I went through my experience, the Irish culture was like divorce was a sin.
Yeah.
So it was difficult talking to my own family about what I was going through.
Oh, I bet. I bet. And the
You know,
shame of that too, is like, Padraic, son, we don't do this.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
not my choice, Ma. Not my
Yeah.
choice.
So yeah, it was very difficult going through. Now, thankfully, my parents um have, my parents are, Irish Catholic and grew up, in a different era than even I grew up. And you know, my mother would tell us stories, and my dad would tell us stories like when they were kids
Oh
and
yeah.
their experience like with the Catholic Church and all of that. But you know, my parents, thankfully, one, they're relatively healthy for their age. They have a bunch of grandkids, and they still get to travel and all that. So I'm very grateful for that. Um, but their outlook has moved along with the times.
I
Um,
bet. Yeah.
but back 15 years ago, when my divorce was, well, 17 years ago now, when the divorce started. Um, but that was kind of like, oh my gosh. Um, and then, when the child alienation started, then 15 years ago, it was kind of like, well, well, or you must have done something.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It gets turned
Um,
back on you.
and I'm
Because
like,
my
yeah, I
else,
probably did.
well,
Yeah, listen,
especially,
I'm not an innocent party, but my son didn't do anything,
yeah,
and he deserves to know both his parents. Um, but again, now, do you know what I mean? As time has gone by, my parents, you know, they weren't stuck in, like, their belief, or what they were taught. They've really learned, looked at actually what is happening, what is here, and then said, yeah, okay, I get you. um
yeah.
so I'm very, very fortunate that way. That I forget what the saying is. It's kind of like, somebody who is stuck in their beliefs, and won't listen to another side is basically, I think the saying goes like they're part of a cult, but somebody who will, stick with their beliefs, but yet will move their beliefs or change their beliefs based on facts and based on what is actually happening. Um, they're kind of different part of society. So I'm very fortunate that my parents, would move with exactly what's happening, and
Yeah,
see what is actually on the ground, what is fact based. Um, so yeah, very fortunate that way. But yeah, no, it was tough. It was tough. The Irish Catholicism, um,
totally. And just the
divorce.
general outlook, it's like oftentimes when things like that happen, men, the only support that they have are their own family, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, cousins, things like this, to be oftentimes looked at as like, well, sure, if she's to leave you, it must be your fault then.
Mhm.
you know
Yeah, yeah.
that's got to be just another layer of trauma to the whole thing. Is like, I'm wifeless now. Half of my possessions are gone, all of my wealth is gone, I'm working just to be in debt, and I don't get to see my son, and my family thinks I'm the one who did this to deserve it. Wow, there's a lot of
Yeah.
compounding trauma that goes.
Yeah.
So
Now, I will say I was no innocent party in the whole thing, but I know for a fact that, my child didn't deserve the outcome, um, of, everything that went down. And I do, you know, I don't hold resentment against my ex-wife, you know what I mean? Um, she did what she did, but I think she did what she was advised to do
yes,
by
the
her
attorney.
attorney, by her, maybe her family, definitely
Yes.
on her father's side. Um, but you know, that's where the attorney should have kind of come into play, and that's where, I really regard our firm very highly, is we'll tell them the hard truth. We'll tell our client the hard truth and say, listen, no, you want to do this, you're on your own. But, we need to be the adult in the room. We're not emotionally tied to this situation. You're making decisions on emotion. Let us make decisions on fact. Let us make decisions on, what, and let's talk through it. And then thankfully most clients then see it, kind of say, and it's not that we want to be right. It's, I don't believe there is any such thing as being right. I just think that there's a better way,
Yeah, that's it's beautiful. It keeps an element of realism in the legal battle here. And I think that it's really important that all parties be held accountable. One of the things that I've heard you say multiple times during our time together today, and I've also seen this on one of your YouTube videos as well, was I am not a faultless party. I have to take accountability for what I did in the situation in order to cause the divorce and to create a schism and to even paint the picture in my ex's mind that I maybe am not deserving to see my child. And to say, even if I disagree with any of those elements, I can still say and own my actions. What I did was not right. That alone, I think, is a very important part that all too often gets completely disregarded when it comes to legalities at all. To show that human element of, yes, I definitely picked up the the situation here with my actions, and it wasn't only me, but I want to take accountability for this, and I want to change that because my kids don't deserve this, and realistically my ex doesn't either. I need to just create as much peace between myself and the whole situation as possible, and that alone creates a space for healing where oftentimes things can be resolved over time. But in a situation of he said, she said, both partners trying to poke each other in the eye in a struggle, vying for power, that doesn't help anybody, and it certainly doesn't help the kids. And here we are, we're in the United States, we're in the third generation now where divorce has been really common. Divorce is more common. Like, for instance, when I went to school, of all of the kids that I knew and hung out with, my parents and maybe 3 or 4 other kids were the only kids that did not come from divorced families. And to be perfectly honest, actually, my dad was married before he met my mom. I have a half sister floating around who hates my father so bad she'll never even see me. She won't meet myself or my brother. So, and my dad was active duty, Vietnam era, and that was he was in Vietnam while his first daughter was born. And so I can only imagine all of the different circumstances that could have led towards him walking away from that situation, everything else. But what I'm seeing, despite that entire history, is that very few children actually had both parents in the home, which means that the parent that had custody was pretty much always working or always doing something to make money, whether that was selling drugs, whether that was, working 2-3 jobs and never being home and having latchkey children, or whether that meant that the TV was raising them most of the time, or whether that meant that the parent was trying to make a better future for them and then going to school on top of working and again being unavailable emotionally, physiologically, whatever. I don't think that this is the best situation for kids at all, whether it's being in the court appointed custody of a parent who is struggling to be a parent, or there were a lot of cases too where mom was like, oh, I got remarried to a guy, that guy would beat the shit out of the kids, or sexually abuse them. This was one of the cases that my daughter had with one of her friends recently. Was her father got completely cut out of the picture because of legal situation. Her mom gets with some guy. That guy's installing cameras in the shower so that he can sell the videos of his stepdaughters to other weirdos who are just complete perverts. And then they both get rid of him and then miss him so bad that they invite him back in to the house. Because you know what I mean? Like the type of Stockholm syndrome type of abuse, but at least it's consistent and at least it's regular and at least I can depend on that. Whereas I don't know what's going to happen if we don't have this extra income or whatever. These are not the types of situations that objectively, when we look as a follow-up to these cases, these are not the best ways that the decisions could have gone. There are so many better ways in terms of court-based decisions, but the courts, the way that it's set up, really kind of doesn't create much of a follow-up and let's relook at this situation. They can, right? Like the judge has the ability to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and try this for a year and then let's go ahead and review the case. But oftentimes that's not the thing. It's we made the decision and then that's the way that it is, right?
So yes, now there's, as far as follow-ups, they're few and far between.
Yeah.
And when decisions are made, they're essentially made on, well, what are the facts now?
Yes.
And then we'll make the decision based on that. But as you know yourself, in 6 months' time, the facts could be totally different.
That's exactly right. A lot goes into a person having the impetus to change because of shitty situations. You know, that changes a lot.
So, but where I see is, and this needs to be changed, especially in the state that we practice. We come with a final agreement, signed by the judge, a final order, whether it was agreed by the parties or whether it went all the way to trial and the judge made the decision based on the facts as they are today. And then let's just say, dad gets 20% parenting time, mom has the other 80%. There's a few, kind of relief valves, built into the procedure. But to change custody, dad has to wait 2 years.
Jeez.
And that's wrote into, it's in statute, it's in the legislation.
Wow.
Like once you have a final order on custody, you cannot do anything with that unless there's an emergency.
And that's law, state law, or is that federal law that
That's state law?
State law. So this could vary from state to state, but where you're practicing is Minnesota, correct?
Correct.
Which is also why it becomes an impetus not to have things on dad's files because you're so close to Canada. It's like traveling to Canada is oftentimes like a shopping experience, or we're going to go visit Niagara because it's close, not necessarily because they're trying to flee the country, right? Wow.
Well, I heard a story about a man who, he was an architect, and the project that he was working on was in Canada.
Yeah.
And he would commute once a week to go be on site on the project. And the next thing, this order of protection was filed. Right away, he was banned from Canada for 10 years.
Which means that he's out of work now too for that project.
I mean, he was with a larger company, but yeah, it didn't help his career path, and the company was able to reassign him, and he was able to work remotely on the project. But yeah, basically he wasn't able to enter in and out and do on-site visits. So it kind of put the company, they had to expend different resources to do the site visits, and yeah, it's the damage is not, we were speaking about the damage of an attorney's letter, but the damage of an OFP, but it doesn't just sit on that person that you're trying to be vengeful with. It's like a, like a stone in the water, it just sends out these ripple effects. It's like, well, it affected the project that he was on, it affected the team that he was working, affected the company that he was working for, it affected his ability to travel, even, whether it be for fun or for business, maybe affected his income, that he mightn't be making as much money because he might have to be downgraded, which then in turn affects his kids and in turn affects his family. Same with the attorney's letter. It doesn't affect just the person who receives the letter. It affects the children down the road. It affects grandparents on both sides. It affects aunts and uncles and cousins. And now all of a sudden, well, we don't want to see anybody on mom's side of the family. So all the cousins and the grandparents, and it's just like that. It just goes on and on. And I don't think people are very aware of that, because it's they just want something now, and they just want it against this one person. And then there's an attorney who is more than happy to say, yes, absolutely, pay the retainer and we'll write it up, and absolutely we'll do it. But the attorney, I believe, being the sober party in the room, not dealing on emotion and kind of, whatever this person is going through, should be able to take a step back and say, you know what damage am I going to do if we do this? Who am I going to damage? And then some attorneys say, well, it's not me that's doing it. The client wants it. It's the client who's creating the damage.
Yeah, but that's a big bypass, though, of all
It is, yeah.
responsibility, because it's
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
that person, that client that you're working with, they may want a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Children themselves want a lot of things. I remember when my daughter was like 2 years old, she really wanted to stick her finger into the electrical light socket. We don't just give people what they want, and for good reason,
Yeah. So that's kind of what as I say, I envision, my future eventually is actually speaking to attorneys on kind of basically that point, that you're the first line of defense to actually help these children. If somebody shows up, with real credible allegations of domestic
Yes.
abuse, and absolutely, you do what you need to do. The law is there for people to be protected. But somebody comes in and that this is just about revenge, then it's kind of to take a step back and have a real thoughtful look at the damage that can be done. And that's kind of, back to the story where, my co-parenting potential client, I'm like, listen, you're just at an impasse. You do need more than likely need an independent third party to listen to both sides and help you over this hill. But what you don't need is the court system involved, because of the damage it will do. And here's what the damage it will do. Not just to you, not just to your ex-wife, to your co-parent, but also to your children, also to, the grandparents, also to, and, do you want that? Because I can see it. You can't right now. You're blinded with
you're seeing red, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. You're kind of in the heat of the moment and you want something done. But really, let's take a step back and be very thoughtful about this. Really, you are only at the brow of a hill and you just need a little bit of help to get over it. And then your life can carry on. But the damage that I can do is like just will last. Yeah, oh yeah, it'll never be the same.
Wow. That's very important. And it's so great, like so refreshing to hear from a licensed attorney these very words and these types of awarenesses, because like you said earlier, 99% of attorneys ruin it for the rest of us. What I have seen, even in amongst my own friends who have become attorneys, is just a cutthroat, learn how to manipulate the situation for the client and manipulate the client to draw out the case in order to make the money. And there's such a system of ethics and humanity that I feel is lacking oftentimes when we seek out legal avenues. I think this dissuades a lot of people, regardless of what the case is, from actually going through the court system, because of the amount of, it just gets looked at as kind of widespread corruption. But a lot of it is not just the corruption of the courts, it is the apathy of the attorneys involved. And how they will do anything to vie for power as long as the client income is coming in. So it's really, really nice to hear that there's a new face to this. Now, Padraic, tell us a little bit more about the Legal Dad and your legal services, what you provide, how you provide them, things like that.
So the Legal Dad, we have a relatively new website, thelegaldad.com. There you can, somebody who is experiencing issues, with their children, the basically what we can. So there's a form here where we can schedule a complimentary consultation. You can call our office. But we prioritize working with dads, working with fathers who are having issues gaining access to their kids. Whether that be, because of child support, whether it be, that there's an order already in place, but the other side is not abiding by the order. So we're mostly what they call post-judgment. Maybe a dissolution or a separation or child custody has already been through the court. But now one side is not abiding by the agreement, by the order. So maybe a lot of enforcement actions. Divorces, we will take on divorces right from the beginning, but only if there are children involved. Because we want to be sure that there are robust plans for the future in place for the children and for parenting time and equal access. Unfortunately, if you are being divorced but no children are involved, to us is you're splitting money, property, assets. We'll be happy to recommend you to somebody else. Our post-judgment work, as I say, it's, enforcement, maybe child support, there's a change in circumstances, a person maybe have been injured on a workplace injury, but are now, not working, so their income is dropped. They need some help because they're paying, large amounts of child support, but the circumstances have changed, need some help with things like that. Unfortunately, to provide this service, we're not free, but we do the best we can with what we have, and we're as effective as we possibly can with our clients' money. We're very respectful of their money. We're very open with our clients. We talk a lot with our clients. We connect with our clients on a regular basis. And basically that's coming from leaning on my own experience. The part of, going into court and the next thing, this hearing would go by and there'd be attorneys talking and screaming, and then the judge would say, okay, see you guys in 90 days. And then the client walks out and says, what the fuck just happened there?
Seriously.
So we're very aware of that. So we are very good at speaking with our client to prepare them, to make them aware of what's going to happen, how these things happen, what the mechanisms are to make them happen. But we're also very open with our clients because we want them to be open with us. Our job is to be a storyteller. How can we tell a story if we don't know it? So we need to be honest with our client, and then our client needs to be honest with us. We have a zero judgment, office. But that again is leaning on my experience. I would send an email to my attorney, and then I'd get, a response in 2 days and say, oh, there's nothing going on. See you at the next court appearance. By the way, here's a $200 charge because you emailed me.
Wow.
It's
wow.
So how do I feel comfortable speaking to somebody like that? And how is that person to represent me to the best of their ability if I'm afraid to actually tell them my story because I'm afraid of the charges? So that's where we're very good at hey, we need you to tell your story. We need to know it. And that is a very crucial part of how, because again, how are we supposed to tell the story if we're not aware of the story?
Yeah.
If the person is afraid to speak to us because they're thinking about money. So, we say to our clients, when they try and keep a call short, it's like, listen, we still need to know this. So we kind of go, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to you? Well, of course, it's 10. It's my kids. It's very important. Okay, well, then you need to set aside whatever you're thinking about and you need to sit down and tell us your story.
Yeah.
But our concentration is fathers. Mothers have contacted us. We do have a great referral for mothers. Mothers deserve representation as much as fathers, but we feel that we can just fathers can feel with us a little better. Like 100% of my clients said, hey, the reason why we're hiring you is because you know how we feel.
Yes.
You know how I feel. And honestly, if we took on and this does happen, mothers sometimes, child alienation and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I honestly would not know how a mother would feel, because a mother has total different instincts and feelings than a father does. And we're very aware of that. So that's why we kind of stay in our lane with fathers. Absolutely, mothers can call us. We're happy to talk with them, happy to, consult with them. But ultimately, we do refer mothers to another female attorney who is also a mother.
Brilliant.
So we have that going for us. I mean, we try not to turn anybody away, but we do qualification calls and stuff like that. And the reason being is we want to make sure that, somebody really isn't just seeking revenge, that they
Yeah.
actually have a case, that they have a genuine case. We have people call us, oh, I want to sue the judge. Well, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to sue the judge. You
Yeah.
can do other avenues, but yeah, we're not your people. And then kind of that goes back to something, you had mentioned earlier about, the judicial system. When I went through my experience, I blamed the judge the entire time. It was always the judge's fault. But now, knowing what I know now, really the judge never got the information that he should have got. My attorney should have been stronger in giving him the information, but the chaos that was being created by the other side didn't give us the opportunity to give the information. So the judge was basically blind. So it was the attorney's fault. So don't be blaming judges for, a decision that you felt should have gone your way or anything like that. Take a deep look at your attorney, take a deep look at the chaos possibly created by the other side. But the judge really can only deal with what they have in front of them. And if nothing is put in front of them, the judge is hamstrung.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Padraic, just really fast, for people who have already had some sort of court-based litigation or case around all of this, and they've come to a conclusion, a court-ordered mandate, um, is there any hope down the line for an appeal or to change a situation once there's already been a court-ordered mandate or a decision made? Like, if, say, you know, well, even in your own case, let's talk about somebody in your own case. Would you have recourse now to go to court and say, hey, I still want custody of my child. I want to reapply for custody of my child. Can we revisit this case now that it's been 10 whatever years, 15 years down the road?
So in my own case, the answer would be no, because there was never a final determination. There was so much chaos created in my case. The judge never got to hear the facts. The judge never got to, hear my story. The judge never got to weigh, the evidence on either side and come to a final determination. My case has always been left in limbo. My son is now over the age of 18, so it's
his decision now.
his decision now. And again, data has shown us that, kids that, have been, alienated from one parent, usually, if they go off to college and they're first time living alone, and then they kind of start thinking more and dealing more for themselves, that, data is showing kind of between the ages of 19 and 24, that a child will reach out to the other parent. Because they will kind of start thinking, oh, I have this whole other side of my family I don't know anything about, and they will reach out. So I'm leaving that decision up to him. Now, in other cases, when there's been a final determination, an appeal only goes to if the court made a mistake. So if you can, really point at something that the judge made a mistake, that the judge didn't apply the law properly, the judge didn't allow this evidence in when they should have allowed it in, different kind of scenarios. The appeals court will look at the record. And if they see that the court made a mistake, they'll send it back down, but you'll never relitigate. They'll send it back down for a new decision, or the appeals court will make a decision and say, this person should have this and should have that. Or, maybe retry the case, but now you got to allow this evidence in that wasn't allowed before. Expensive.
So it's cost prohibitive if
It's cost prohibitive
when it's available.
And then timing also, it could take 3 to 4 years. So now you have a child, you know what I mean? You figure your child is in your life, probably 16, they kind of start getting independent.
Yeah.
And then you knock another 4 years off that. Well, then that's 12. And then you knock, 2 years to get to the appeal stage. And then you're down to 10. And, are you going to stay in this, for the entire life of your kid? And then the last one would be like a change of circumstances. Kind of like you had mentioned earlier that, mom had child, mom moves new boyfriend in, new boyfriend is absolutely, dad could then go and file, hey, there's been a serious change of circumstances. They could probably file ex parte orders and have the sheriff remove the child for the child's best interest, not to be living with another man who's recording them in the shower.
Yeah.
There are different avenues like that, but it's all down to, well, what are the facts of that one case?
Wow.
So it can't be taken with a very broad brush,
Well, that seems really unfortunate to me. And I'm hoping that maybe even by having discussions like this, we can see and create more demand as individuals, which will hopefully trickle into our judicial system, that we need to have recourse for reconsideration. Because usually when custody battles are being had, not always, but usually the circumstances are so he said, she said, and so hot and heated that we're not even getting an accurate look at all of the data. We're getting a lot of poking in the eye. And if instead we could take some space, or maybe a decision gets made during that time, but then 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, some method of appeal that isn't quite so limited to help to determine whether this is still the case, whether dad does deserve some more time, or whether mom deserves some more time, or whatever the case is. It just seems like there should be a better recourse for that, because parents can't, once it gets decided by the court, parents can't break that court agreement without being held legally, without being held liable. Even if, mom says, hey, I know that I have a 70% custody type of thing. I get the kid 70% of the time, or whatever the case is. If they want to come with you, I can let them come and hang out with you. Although that gets done, that can also be held against them in court, couldn't it?
So to touch off that point, yes, it could. Because let's just say there's a court order and it's, pretty restrictive, but then over a little bit of time, there's a little bit more trust being built and renewed between mom and dad again. And then mom is like, you know what, the girls want to go, the kids want to go stay with dad, for the weekend. You know what? Dad never had weekends, but now all of a sudden he has weekends. Then it's kind of like, it's summertime. Why don't we do every other week? And let's do every other week. And it's all fine and good. But then dad gets a new girlfriend, mom gets pissed, and mom says, that's it, we're going back to the court order, where you only have the kids once a month. Then dad would have a recourse back to court and say, well, we made this unilateral agreement, and here's how it worked, and it worked, and it worked, and worked until this point. So this past court order, this one court order that we're still working off, has given mom too much control. So we need to change that, and mom needs to relinquish control, because this is what happened. We've had the last 18 months of all this stuff and us working together until I met somebody new. And then mom pulled the rug out from under. So that's not in the best interest of the child. So then the court can review.
Okay, well that's good, because I was under the impression that mom could actually be held liable from a legal perspective if she were to break that court order.
Well, I mean, if let's just say the other way around, and dad had every other weekend, and and he had every other week in the summertime, but then all of a sudden summer comes around and then mom is like, we're going to be on vacation, it's going to be your on week, so you're going to miss like 2 weeks, and then we'll be back, and then you get the phone call, oh well, sorry, the kids are sick, they're not feeling well, and then you miss another week, and then mom is saying, well, this is my week and we're planning on going to grandma's, and we can't swap weeks, and then mom can be held liable. You go back and you enforce the court order.
Yeah.
So there's kind of, if there's enforcing it, but then there's also changing it based on the circumstances that are at hand. But personally, I think when something like this ends up in the court, the judge, instead of saying, come back in 90 days and let's see what's happening, and come back in 90 days and let's see what, and all you're doing is you're just giving more power to one party, then all you're doing is maybe putting one party at a disadvantage because they may not have the money to keep up with legal fees. No, let's go to therapy, more fees. Let's go to this, more fees. Where the judge should say, okay, mom and dad, here are your options. You can pick 1, 2, or 3, but I want to report in 90 days. And if there's no agreement in 90 days, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to trial, and that'll happen within 120 days. And then at the end of trial, I will make my order within 30 days. And then that's the order. But what happens is, some attorneys go in with the tactic, well, let's just keep going until they run out of money. So I'm currently working a case where that has happened. Dad has run out of money.
Oh.
But because that happened to me, I'm like, hey, client, I'm glad you were honest with me. I see that things are not good, but we're going to keep going. We're not leaving you. We're just going to keep this going. We'll fight it to the best of our ability. Unfortunately, I'm still going to keep adding to your bill. But when this is all over, then hopefully we can come to some kind of an arrangement where we'll come up with a payment plan or something. And so dad stays in the fight. Now it's set for trial, but now mom and mom's attorney are kind of coming to the table and say, hey, do you think we can make an agreement? And I'm like, well, you should have made an agreement a year ago.
But yes, I guess we can.
But your philosophy was, your theory was that he would run out of money and then he would agree to whatever you gave him. But now you've seen that he has counsel all the way through, that you realize that he's not going to run out of counsel.
Yeah.
Even though he's run out of money, he's still not going to run out of representation. So they've had to change their tact. But isn't it a terrible thing that in today's society it's like, well, let's, you know, use the kid as a pawn, let our tactic be, let's just motion after motion after motion until the other side runs out of money, and then they'll either go away or they'll just accept whatever we offer them.
I know it seems like there should be some recourse to preventing that from happening, because that is a common tactic, isn't it?
And that's where the judges come in. It's kind of like, judge, you need, you're the judge. You need to make the decision. These parties will not come to an agreement. That's where the judge needs to give them 90 days. Say, okay, you have 90 days. You can go to therapy. You can go to mediation. All these services are available to you. I will give you 90 days to make the decision yourselves on how you're going to move forward, to make the agreement yourselves, how you're going to move forward. No agreement after 90 days, we go to trial. And then 30 days after that. So by my reckoning, it should take 6 months for a custody case to weave its way through the system, not 6 years.
Yeah, seriously. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, hopefully discussions like this, and I really, anything that I can do to support a speaking tour for you, Padraic, please don't hesitate to let me know, because I would love to be able to get the word out there. I would love to help you in any way possible, because I think that we need to raise a lot of concerns about this, because it has crippled our society here in the United States. Having broken families does not help anyone. And having families that would have the opportunity to get the help that they need, to have the mediation that is necessary to come to decisions, can help to alleviate a whole lot of the stress and the burden that otherwise just falls on the children. There's always stress that's going to fall on the parent who gets held liable for the child support. There's always an economic burden there. There's always an economic burden in order to pay the attorneys. The burden is already great enough. It does not need to fall on the kids. And unfortunately, that's oftentimes what ends up happening. So what can you tell to people who don't live in the state of Minnesota, then, where you don't have a legal service? Are there other firms that you're able to point to, or friends or connections that you're beginning to develop, so that you can refer out when people from other states might be concerned about this?
So I'm very fortunate. I've been very active in different online groups and online communities, and then also in different online legal groups and lawyer groups. So if you're not inside in the state of Minnesota, please just reach out to our website anyway. We'll happily, do some due diligence for you to find you the right fit. Because, hiring an attorney, it's a big investment.
It is.
So there, you need to realize that, you need to be able to figure out whether this attorney is out for your best interest and your child's best interest, whether you and this attorney can actually work together, whether both your goals are, aligned. But we'd be happy to help with that. So yeah, happy to, connect with people around the country. Happy to create a movement where it'd be more like approaching the legislator, where there should be a presumption, and it should be in statute that, any custody issues, unless, there's domestic abuse or domestic violence against the mom, against the dad, against the children, unless there's credible accusations of domestic violence, that the presumption should be shared parenting. And that would be before it ever gets into court. And that should be, in every state in the country.
I agree. Padraic, are you able to create some sort of course, for like a continuing education course for existing attorneys, to be able to hear your perspective on these things? Or do you think that a lot of existing attorneys wouldn't care because it's business as usual?
So there's kind of, maybe, well, the biggest uphill struggle there is, that this is where I want to create the speaking tour, to actually go and speak to attorneys groups, and especially family law attorneys, and especially attorneys who work in the custody arena. But, and it's horrible to say this, but the family law industry is a $50 billion a year industry.
There we have it. Yeah.
So it's like, well, if we cure the ailment,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This
you
sounds a lot
know,
like the problem with medicine. Sounds a lot
it's,
like,
isn't it very familiar?
wow.
Um, but I do think that, look at attorneys, they're going to make money. Um, but there is an empathy involved in especially doing what we do to be able to, kind of, there has to come a point where you have to be able to tell your client to stop. Enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only one winning here, and be honest with your client, the only one winning here is me, the attorney. I
There
am
you go.
taking everything you have. I'm taking everything your parents have because you continue to seek revenge against somebody else, but you're not thinking about your child. So enough. Let's end this. Let's put our swords down and, figure out a way forward that is actually in the best interest of our child, of your child. But there are attorneys out there that just love to keep going and going, and then the email or the phone call comes. I'm sorry, Mr. Attorney or Miss Attorney, I can't afford to pay you anymore. My life savings have been taken. My parents have cashed in their pensions. And then the response is, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But there's nothing more we can do for you."
Oh, wow.
So
Oh,
now you still have this past client with the child custody issue now hanging out there in the wind. So the damage that's done, and I guess, some people think about money. I think about damage that you do to other people and their relationships.
yeah. Touche. Oh, good Lord. What a sticky situation. But at least for your part, Barak, I'm so glad that you're out there. I'm so glad that you're who you are, that you've been through what you've been through, that you are a compassionate voice out there and an opportunity for fathers, particularly those in Minnesota who find themselves in positions like yours, to have recourse to another option and to better legal representation that is going to provide at least a glimpse of hope to bettering the situation for themselves and for their children. It's highly laudable. Thank you so much for all of your work. It's really, really necessary. So yeah, luckily my ex and I, we were able to come to decisions amicably over time, sometimes without strain, sometimes with great strain, but we were able to put it into what does our daughter feel is best and when does she want to come over? And of course, it's broken my heart many a times when it's like, she doesn't want to come over. She'd rather hang out, over there because she's got a huge step family and, like 60 cousins on that side. I have no cousins for her. There's just a whole different type of experience, but we've been able to put it into her domain as much as possible. And even that is a difficult thing because kids should not be in the hot seat for which parent they see. No matter what decision they make, there's always heartstrings that are being plucked there, on both ends, And so even though we've done the best that we can, it's still a hard thing. And I think that that's what people are going to have to remember about all of this anyway, is that when we start families, the whole concept is we need to be very, very conscious about what we're doing and what agreements we're even making upon marriage, upon having children, upon whatever, because as we can see just by the sheer numbers of people who do get divorced and who do have to take legal recourse to these things, it's not just going to alter your life and your financial situation and your psychological well-being, but also those of your children and maybe even of your grandparents because of the influence that they had, and your great grandchildren and so on. This is a generational thing that goes on. So it just brings just like with medicine, right? And just like with doctors, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And as much as we can, we really need to bring it back home and bring it into our own court, that I need to think about these things before I engage in them and be as responsible as I can. And if not, thank God that guys like Padraic Walsh are out there that might be able to help us. So very good.
Well, I really appreciate that, Phoenix, and listen, I really appreciate the conversation. You know, but you're a man who also understands the experience because you've been through it. Um, and but sometimes it is, that, at, at least your child has a choice. You know what I mean? To go see mom, to go see dad, where a lot of children out there, they don't get that choice. That choice is taken away from them. But you understand the strain and the emotions and the trauma that's involved with an experience like this. And really, I mean, in my eyes, a simplistic view is like, well, there's really no need for it.
Yeah.
Kind of like, hey, you don't get along with
Exactly.
dad anymore. Fine, cut him loose, but don't make your child suffer.
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
but I really do appreciate your time, and I really do appreciate the conversation, and I'm excited, moving forward. And again, any of your listeners, any of the people viewing this, anybody has any questions or anything like that, please feel free, fill out the form in our website. We will get back to you. We will talk to you. If you're not in the state of Minnesota, we will be happy to look for referrals for you. It will be at no cost to you. But then maybe there are other, avenues we could explore where you might not need legal representation, where you may need just, something else. You maybe just a different option. And we'd be happy to go through different options with you.
So amazing. So amazing. Well, Padraic, I really, really, really want to thank you for all of your time. And likewise, I want to thank all of our listeners too for sticking with this conversation. This has been, I think, one of the more poignant and more important conversations that I've had about sociological dynamics, especially here in the United States, that I've had probably for quite a while now, because this is something that I consider to be more important than any pandemic that has been talked about over the last number of years. This crumbles our society and emotionally shatters ourselves and our children and our children's children. And this is a sense of generational trauma that continues. We're already about 3 generations in with this type of thing being perpetuated inside of our culture. And at some point, we need to come up with solutions to stop the madness and to stop this trauma. And so if you feel that same way, please do something really great by sharing this with 3 people who you think would be able to benefit from this conversation. If those 3 people could also be tasked with the task of getting it out to 3 people themselves within less than just a couple of generations of that type of information moving onwards, this idea will start to gain some pretty critical mass and be an important conversation that we can have, not just in an isolated podcast episode like this, but sociologically as a culture. And it is through that type of conversation that we'll be able to make any sort of change or impact into healing this very crippling pandemic, if you want to refer to it like that, to our country. So again, Padraic, thank you so much for all of your time today, buddy. I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts and sharing all of your legal expertise and just showing up the way that you are as an individual. It really means a lot to me.
Phoenix, thank you so much for having me, and it's been my honor, my pleasure. Thank you.
Very well. All right. To all of our listeners, if you like this, please like, subscribe, hit the notification button, share it with 3 people. Task them to share it with 3 people. Let's keep this information going. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put your questions down in the comments. We always get around to them as often as we can. We would like to thank you all. Have a very good one. Until we see you during our next episode, keep well and many blessings.